"Your boy doesn't belong here. Make him leave." That's the first thing I heard when I rounded the corner of our HOA's pristine pool gate. Karen clipboard clutched like a weapon was standing there with that smug grin she saves for moments when she thinks she's in charge. And beside her was a cop off duty but armed with arrogance towering over my 13-year-old son Jay. The neighborhood prides itself on community standards, but that night I realized those words were just camouflage for something uglier. My son wasn't trespassing. He wasn't causing trouble. He was simply existing, and that apparently was too much for them. I stood there, every muscle in my body coiled, knowing I had two choices: explode in anger or gather my weapons, the Karen way receipts, bylaws, and patience sharpened into a blade. What came next didn't just protect my boy, it shattered the mask of the entire HOA. Before we dive deeper, drop a comment with your location and the local time. It's always wild to see where everyone's tuning in from. You know, when I first bought into this neighborhood, I actually thought I was upgrading. On paper, it looked perfect. Cul-de-sacs curling like ribbons, manicured lawns, and property values climbing higher than the ivy on Karen's trellis. Realtors sell you the dream block parties, safe streets, a community where everyone looks out for one another. What they don't tell you is that looking out for one another often means spying, reporting, and competing over who can wield the bylaws like a medieval sword. I'm David, 46 years old, project manager, by trade professional collector of receipts by instinct. Not the shopping kind, though. I've got plenty of those too. I mean receipts in the sense of proof, documentation, hard evidence. See, before project management, I spent nearly a decade as a city records clerk. I know the law of paper trails, people lie, but emails don't. And HOA folks, they're addicted to emails. They can't resist copying the entire board for the smallest complaints, like whether your garbage can was out at 6:59 a.m. instead of 7:00 sharp. My son Jay, he's the reason I breathe and the reason I keep calm, even when I'd rather shout. He's 13, awkward in the best way, with skateboard scabs on his knees and a pair of earbuds perpetually dangling like jewelry. He's polite, quiet, and just starting to carve out his place in the world. Jay's never been the kind of kid who mouths off or picks fights. But to someone like Karen, just his presence, his skin tone, his youth, his silence was enough to trigger suspicion. Now, let me paint you Karen. Her real name's Pamela Whitaker, but nobody calls her Pamela. Around here, she's just Karen whispered with eye rolls at backyard barbecues. She's the compliance chair of the HOA board, a self-appointed sheriff, armed with a fluorescent pink clipboard and a smug smile that could sour milk. She has this way of leaning in close when she talks like she's sharing a secret, except it's always about something trivial: the shade of your mailbox, the angle of your holiday lights, the color of your kid's backpack. Karen thrives on power in teaspoons, and every teaspoon adds up to a gallon of control. Of course, Karen needed muscle. Enter Officer Brent Harlow. On duty, he wore a badge for the city. Off duty, he strutted around our HOA in a tactical vest he didn't need, acting like the cul-de-sac was his personal beat. His smile was brittle, his eyes colder than the chlorine in the pool. He wasn't officially hired by the HOA, or at least not through a proper vote. But Karen paraded him around like he was her personal enforcer. She called it extra safety. I called it theater with a side of intimidation. The rest of the board, let's just say they weren't leaders so much as spectators. Mark, the HOA president, had the backbone of a pool noodle. He liked to smile, nod, and avoid conflict. Susan, the treasurer, loved her spreadsheets more than she loved the truth. And the rest, well, they attended meetings like they were hostages, promised free wine if they endured long enough. Karen ran the show, and nobody dared pull the curtain. At first I laughed it off. The microaggressions, the nitpicking, it was irritating but almost comical. Karen once photographed my porch light because it was too warm-toned compared to the neighborhood standard. Another time, she emailed me a 3-paragraph essay on my lawn clippings, blowing an inch past my property line. I could have written a sitcom called Everybody Hates Karen with the material she provided. But then it started to escalate. Karen's emails shifted from silly to sinister. Instead of, "Please adjust your garbage can placement," she started warning about a troubling rise in vandalism. Instead of "Your lawn needs edging," it became certain teens loitering around common areas. She never named names, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. And somehow those emails always circulated right before board votes. Votes about fines, budgets, or who got what contracts. It was like she was laying the groundwork for something bigger, planting seeds of fear and watering them with paranoia. And the board, they bought it. Hook, line, and sinker. Mark even suggested Karen deserved special commendation for her dedication to community safety. I nearly choked on my lemonade when I heard that one. Meanwhile, Jay felt the stares. At the basketball hoop by the park, kids whispered about how Karen's always watching. At the pool, lifeguards gave him the side-eye because Karen had labeled him unauthorized in an email once. Jay stopped riding his skateboard near the clubhouse altogether. He told me, "Dad, it feels like I'm guilty before I even do anything," and hearing that broke something in me. Still, I held my tongue. I told Jay, "We don't fight fire with fire, we fight it with facts." But secretly, I was stockpiling kindling, because I knew the way Karen operated. She couldn't resist overreaching, and when she did, I'd be ready. That night at the pool gate wasn't an accident. It was the culmination of months of whispers, glares, and carefully worded emails. Karen had built a narrative in her head, and she finally called in her muscle to enforce it. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been watching, listening, and collecting every shred of proof. The powder keg had been primed. All it needed was a spark. And Karen, in her infinite arrogance, was about to strike the match herself. It was supposed to be a normal summer evening. The sun was sliding down, throwing streaks of orange across the neighborhood rooftops. I had just finished grilling burgers when Jay asked if he could meet his friend at the pool. He'd done it dozens of times before. Same path, same gate, same harmless routine. I told him, "Sure, just don't forget your key fob." He waved his earbuds at me like they were his ticket, then jogged off with that lanky stride that makes every dad proud and nervous at the same time. I had no idea that 15 minutes later I'd be sprinting down the sidewalk heart pounding because of what Karen had set in motion. Jay got to the pool gate early. His friend wasn't there yet. So he leaned against the fence, music in his ears, scrolling on his phone. That's it. No vandalism, no trespassing, just a kid waiting. But Karen saw an opportunity. From her patio perch across the green, she marched over, phone already in hand, and started her performance. "Excuse me," she barked, tapping her clipboard like it was a badge. "This area is for residents only. You need to leave." Jay slid one earbud out. "I live here," he said, pointing toward our house. He was calm, polite, but to Karen that wasn't enough. She didn't want proof. She wanted compliance. She dialed faster than you can blink. And within minutes, a black pickup rolled up, and out stepped Officer Brent Harlow, off duty but kitted out in tactical gear that screamed intimidation. He adjusted his vest like he was gearing up for a raid, not checking on a teenager by a swimming pool. "Show me ID," Harlow demanded, looming over Jay. "My wallet's at home," Jay replied, voice trembling but steady. "I'm waiting for my friend. We both have key fobs." That answer wasn't enough either. Harlow grabbed Jay's wrist, twisting it just enough to make him wince. He shoved him against the fence. Jay's phone clattered to the ground, still playing music faintly through tinny earbuds. "Non-compliant juvenile," Harlow muttered. Always an excuse. Neighbors started to notice. A woman walking her dog froze mid-step, fumbling for her phone. Another man whispered, "Is that really necessary?" But Karen just stood there, arms crossed, nodding approvingly like she was directing a play, and her star actor was nailing the role. That's when I arrived. I heard the commotion before I saw it. And when I turned the corner, my world tilted. My son, my boy, pinned against a fence by a man twice his size, with Karen smirking like she'd won a prize. "Hey," I shouted, rushing forward. "Get your hands off my son." Harlow turned, eyes narrowing. "Back up, sir. This is official business." "Official?" I laughed, bitter and sharp. "You're off duty in my neighborhood assaulting a kid for waiting at a pool gate. That's not official, it's harassment." I pulled my phone, hit record, and held it up. That was my instinct, document everything. But Harlow's hand shot out faster than I expected. He smacked the phone, nearly sending it flying. My thumb slipped, but the red recording light stayed on. "You can't do that," I said, voice shaking with controlled fury. "That's evidence." His response. He shoved me back with one arm, muttering something under his breath. Jay heard it. I saw the way my son's face changed, the shock, the hurt. Later, when we replayed the audio, that muttered word was faint but undeniable. I don't need to repeat it here. Let's just say it was the kind of word that reduces a child to nothing but a target. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone else had called 911, maybe the woman with the dog. The color drained from Harlow's face. He released Jay, straightened his vest, and muttered, "Misunderstanding." Karen chimed in instantly. "Yes, just a misunderstanding. I was only concerned for the safety of the community." Safety. That word rang in my ears like a curse. The on-duty officers who arrived took statements, but by then the narrative had shifted. Harlow painted a story of a suspicious juvenile loitering, refusing to identify himself, and minimal force being used to ensure compliance. Karen backed him up, voice sweet as syrup. I was furious, but I could already see the gears of bureaucracy grinding in their favor. Later that week, the official report landed in my inbox. It was a sanitized masterpiece, no mention of the shove, the slur, the smirk, just a community resident concerned about vandalism and a youth uncooperative at the pool gate. The language was clinical, detached, and utterly false. I stared at the report bile rising in my throat. Jay sat across from me at the kitchen table, nursing a bruise on his wrist. He didn't say anything, but his silence was heavier than words. That night I made a promise. Not out loud, not even to Jay, but inside myself, where fury and patience burned together. I would not let Karen or Harlow rewrite the truth. I would not let them scar my son with lies. I didn't raise my voice that night. I didn't throw punches. But I started something much more dangerous to people like them. I started building a case. Because if there's one thing I've learned from a career in records, it's this. When the paper trail tells the real story, no smirk or slur can bury it. And I was going to make sure the whole HOA read every last receipt. The thing about lies is they travel fast in neighborhoods like mine, quicker than a golf cart on fresh pavement. By Monday morning, the incident at the pool had already been recast as my son causing trouble and me interfering with security. I didn't even need to check my inbox. The whispers on the sidewalk told the story. Did you hear about the teenager at the gate? The dad got aggressive, apparently. Karen had done what Karen always did, twist the truth into a tale that suited her power. At 9:07 a.m., sharp the first email hit. Subject line, community safety concern. Sender Pamela, Karen Whitaker. She'd copied the entire HOA board, half the committee chairs, and because she loved an audience, the neighborhood's general distribution list. Her version was polished. On Saturday evening, a youth was found loitering at the pool gate without authorization. Out of concern, I contacted our security liaison officer, Harlow. Minimal intervention was required, but the juvenile's parent escalated the situation by filming and yelling. While we regret the incident, it underscores the need for stronger compliance and clearer enforcement. I will propose fines for non-compliance and discuss new safety measures at the next board meeting. She used words like loitering, minimal intervention, and compliance the way a magician uses smoke, distraction, obfuscation, and tucked at the end was the dagger, a proposal for fines. Against me, against Jay. Not only were they rewriting the narrative, they were planning to charge us for it. Then came the official police report. I sat at my kitchen table, hands trembling as I read it. The description was neat, sterile, and completely false. Subject was a juvenile refusing to identify himself. Concerned resident contacted off-duty officer. Officer used minimal force to secure compliance. Parent arrived, causing disruption. Situation de-escalated with no injuries. No mention of Jay being shoved into a fence. No mention of my phone being struck. Certainly no mention of the slur. It was a story stripped of its ugliness, wrapped in bureaucratic jargon, and signed off like it was gospel. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but instead of exploding, I opened my laptop. Years as a records clerk had trained me for this exact moment. Bureaucracy works both ways. You just have to know how to pull the levers. First step, public records request. I filed one for all body cam footage from officers who responded that night. Another for the dispatch audio. A third for incident logs. The city hated these requests, but by law they had to respond. Second step, poolgate camera. I knew the HOA had a contract with a vendor to maintain cameras at community facilities. I pulled the last quarterly budget from my files and found the invoice maintenance of CCTV pool and clubhouse. That meant footage existed whether Karen wanted to admit it or not. I drafted a formal written request under the HOA bylaws. Members may review association records upon written request, including security footage relevant to incidents involving members or their households. Third step, neighbor evidence. That woman walking her dog, she had recorded on her phone. I found her the next evening. She hesitated. People feared Karen's retaliation like kids fear the dark, but finally admitted she had footage of Harlow grabbing Jay. She whispered, "Please don't say my name." I promised anonymity. Another neighbor slipped me Ring doorbell footage. The camera didn't capture everything, but it caught the moment Harlow's hand latched onto Jay's arm, and the audio picked up Karen's voice, urging him to make him comply. It wasn't perfect, but it was damning. Meanwhile, Karen doubled down. Another email went out. I urge all residents to remain vigilant. Reports of vandalism and non-compliant youth are rising. We must protect property values by enforcing standards. She loved that phrase, property values. It was her shield, her justification. No matter what she did, it was always in the name of protecting the neighborhood's investments. The board set a courtesy hearing for me and Jay. Courtesy, that word alone made me laugh out loud. Courtesy was the last thing they had in mind. It was a show trial, plain and simple. Karen would present her version, and the board, spineless as ever, would nod along. But I had something Karen didn't. Patience sharpened into strategy. I started mapping the timeline. I created a spreadsheet. 6:47 p.m. Jay leaves the house. 6:52 arrives at the pool gate. 6:55 Karen approaches. 6:58 Harlow arrives. 7:01 altercation. 7:04 911 call logged. 7:08 on-duty officers arrive. Piece by piece, I slotted in screenshots, clips, audio snippets. The picture was ugly, undeniable, and completely at odds with their report. In private, neighbors began to whisper their support. We saw what happened. That wasn't right. But in public, they stayed silent. Fear of fines, fear of Karen, fear of losing the illusion of peace. I didn't blame them, but I also knew their silence was part of Karen's power. The police side tried stonewalling. My records requests came back with delays. Due to volume requests may take several weeks. Karen's response to my footage request, a terse email. Security footage is not available to members due to privacy. I highlighted the section of the bylaws that proved her wrong, and replied, all while CCing the entire board. They thought they could drown me in red tape. They didn't realize I could swim in it. The night after receiving yet another delay, noticed Jay sat with me at the kitchen table. He fiddled with his phone, eyes downcast. Finally he said, Dad, they're never going to believe me, are they? That cut deeper than anything else. I leaned forward, placed my hand over his. They'll believe you, son. Not because they want to, but because I'll make it impossible for them not to. Karen thinks she's the queen of this HOA. She's about to learn what happens when the paper trail doesn't bow to her crown. And in that moment I knew this wasn't just about defending my boy anymore. It was about exposing the entire rotten foundation Karen had built. She thought she was untouchable. But I was about to show her that even queens can fall, especially when the receipts pile higher than their lies. If there's one thing I learned in my years working city records, it's this: people in power leave fingerprints. Not the kind you dust with powder, but the kind made of invoices, signatures, timestamps, and emails they think no one will ever bother to read. Karen and Harlow believed their word was enough to bury the truth. What they didn't realize was that every lie they told left a breadcrumb on the trail, and I was hungry enough to follow it. I started with the obvious, the timeline. My spreadsheet grew into a tapestry. Every neighbor clip, every ring recording, every dispatch timestamp lined up with precision. I even transcribed snippets of dialogue, Karen saying, "Make him comply," Harlow muttering his slur under his breath. I added annotations, highlighted contradictions. My kitchen wall looked like a detective's office. Printouts, pushpins, red strings stretching from column to column. Jay teased me for it once, but I caught the glint of pride in his eyes. He knew I was building something bigger than us. Then I dug into the HOA's financials. Most residents ignored those PDFs attached to quarterly newsletters. Not me. Buried in page 8 of the last budget were security reimbursements. The amounts weren't large gas stipends, patrol meals, a line item for auxiliary services. But the names attached to those reimbursements, that's where things got interesting. Several checks were cut directly to Karen herself. Not unusual, since board members sometimes paid vendors up front. But the vendor listed was new, Witsec Solutions LLC. My eyebrows shot up. A quick public records search showed it had been registered only 3 months earlier, to none other than Karen's son, Ethan. He was 22, supposedly in college, though most of us had only seen him cruising the neighborhood in a tricked-out Jeep. Now apparently he was running a security company that existed on paper and little else. So let me connect the dots for you. Karen invents a security concern. She brings in her pet officer Harlow as muscle. She funnels HOA funds into her son's LLC, then reimburses herself for expenses. That's not community service. That's corruption dressed in khakis and a polo shirt. I kept digging. I pulled county complaint records on Harlow. Sure enough, there were summaries of prior use of force complaints. Nothing substantiated, but a pattern was clear. Confrontations with young men, always minorities, always excused as minimal intervention. The city had settled at least one case quietly. Now, I had enough to be angry. But anger doesn't topple empires, evidence does. I filed another round of public records requests, city contracts involving off-duty officers, the HOA's vendor approvals, Karen's board emails. I CC'd not just the board this time, but also the city councilwoman who'd made headlines for pushing youth safety reforms. I wanted Karen to feel the ground shake under her feet. And oh, did it start shaking. Karen sent out a frantic blast email. Do not be misled by malicious rumors. All contracts were properly approved. The board fully supports our safety initiatives. Except I already had proof she was lying. According to the bylaws, any contract over $500 required a full board vote. There was no record of such a vote. In fact, the treasurer's signature appeared on only one emergency authorization, a loophole Karen had clearly abused. The trap was taking shape. Meanwhile, I knew I needed outside credibility. I reached out to the city's internal affairs division, attaching a carefully compiled packet, the timeline, the videos, the audio. I didn't send everything, never show your full hand too early. But I gave them enough to open an official review. Within days, I received an acknowledgement letter. We are in receipt of your materials. Officer Harlow's conduct is under preliminary review. That letter was gold. It didn't prove guilt, but it confirmed scrutiny. And scrutiny was Karen's kryptonite. Neighbors who had been silent began to whisper louder. One even slid a manila envelope under my door, copies of emails Karen had sent them privately, urging them to keep an eye on Jay. The wording was damning, coded but clear. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was orchestrating a witch hunt. At home, Jay asked if this would actually work. Dad, what if they just ignore you? What if Karen spins it again? I crouched beside him, held his shoulder. Then we don't stop. We keep building until the story is too heavy to spin. She thinks this is about one night at the pool, but soon the whole neighborhood will see it's about years of her abusing power. And when the receipts stack high enough, even her clipboard won't hold them back. By now, Karen sensed the tide turning. She pushed for a new rule at the next board meeting. No audio or video recording permitted at HOA functions without prior approval. Translation gag order. That alone told me I was over the target. People only try to shut down cameras when they fear what cameras might reveal. I didn't protest openly, not yet. Instead, I filed a formal petition for a special members meeting under the bylaws requiring signatures from 20% of homeowners. That was my ace in the hole force, an open forum outside Karen's control where the evidence could speak for itself. The trap was nearly ready. I had evidence of fraud, abuse, and negligence. I had internal affairs watching. I had neighbors whispering. All I needed was the stage. And when Karen gave it to me, when she stood at that podium smug as ever ready to wield her clipboard like a sword, I would turn her stage into a gallows. The funny thing about preparing for war is that most people imagine weapons and armor. In an HOA, war is fought with petitions, posters, and binders thicker than a phone book. My kitchen had turned into a command center. The smell of ink from my home printer mixed with the aroma of Jay's leftover pizza as I churned out exhibits like a one-man law firm. Step one was legitimacy. If I wanted to face Karen on equal footing, I couldn't just rant at a board meeting. I needed a special members meeting, something the bylaws guaranteed if enough homeowners demanded it. 20% signatures. That was the magic number. And believe me, I worked those sidewalks like a politician in campaign season. Some doors slammed, others cracked open cautiously. But once I explained, once I showed neighbors snippets of the ring footage, the reimbursement checks, the IA acknowledgement letter, eyes widened. People whispered I knew something was off. Even those who feared Karen's wrath signed quietly, their pens trembling. Within a week, I had 25%, more than enough. Step 2 was presentation. I didn't want to just tell the story, I wanted to show it. I enlarged stills from the poolgate footage. Jay's arm twisted Harlow's shadow, looming Karen, smirking in the corner. I blew up copies of the Witsex Solutions invoices, circled Ethan's name in red, and taped them to poster boards. I printed the bylaws clause about contract approval in bold, underlined it, and stapled it to every packet. Jay helped with the QR codes. If people scan this, they'll get the full timeline right, he asked, holding up his phone. Exactly, I said. They won't just hear my words. They'll see it with their own eyes. He grinned, proud to be part of it. For the first time since that night at the pool, I saw his confidence return. Step 3, outside accountability. Karen thrived in shadows where only her allies were watching, so I widened the audience. I emailed 2 local reporters, one from the city paper, the other from a neighborhood blog with a surprisingly large readership. I attached teasers, HOA chair funnels money through Sons LLC off-duty cop under IA review after shoving minor. Within hours, both wrote back, "We'll be there." I also reached out to Councilwoman Rivera's office. She'd been making noise about police accountability and HOA abuses. Her aide replied, confirming they'd send a representative. That was all I needed, proof someone with real authority was watching. Step 4, neutral ground. Karen had a habit of railroading dissenters by cutting off microphones, declaring out of order, or banging the gavel until her voice drowned yours out. Not this time. I hired a certified parliamentarian, yes, that's a real thing, to oversee procedure. It cost me a few $100s, but it was worth every penny. Nothing rattles a petty tyrant more than rules being enforced against them. By the time the meeting was scheduled, the tension in the neighborhood was palpable. Karen plastered flyers on every mailbox. Stop the smear, protect property values. She painted me as the villain, an angry father stirring chaos for personal gain. The irony was rich Karen accusing me of chaos while she secretly bankrolled her son with HOA funds. The weekend before the showdown, Jay and I took a walk around the block. Lawn sprinklers hissed, porch lights flicked on, but the usual friendly waves were missing. People were waiting, watching, keeping their cards close. Jay asked, "What if no one believes you, Dad?" I stopped, looked him straight in the eyes. "Then we show them anyway. Truth isn't a popularity contest, it's a mirror. Once they see it, they can't unsee it." Karen tried one last move, an emergency email claiming the special meeting was invalid due to improper notice. Too bad I had followed the bylaws to the letter, certified mail to every member 48 hours advance, posting at the clubhouse, even copies taped to lampposts. I replied with a screenshot of the bylaw section highlighted in neon yellow. No wiggle room. Meanwhile, Harlow went quiet. Rumors swirled that internal affairs had pulled him off active duty. I couldn't confirm it, but the way he disappeared from Karen's side said enough. She stood alone now, propped up by her clipboard and a dwindling reserve of bravado. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. I sat at the kitchen table, flipping through binders, rehearsing lines in my head. Jay padded in wearing his oversized hoodie and sat across from me. "Dad," he said softly, "whatever happens, thanks for fighting for me." I swallowed hard, blinking back the sting in my eyes. "Always, son, always." And with that, the countdown was over. The clubhouse lights would soon blaze. The neighbors would soon gather. And Karen, who had spent years wielding power unchecked, was about to stand under a spotlight she couldn't dim. The trap was set, the receipts were ready. And when the gavel dropped, it wouldn't be Karen running the show anymore. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse looked like it had been prepped for battle. Folding chairs lined every inch of carpet, neighbors squeezed shoulder to shoulder, their murmurs buzzing like a hive ready to swarm. The air conditioning was broken naturally, and sweat gleamed on foreheads. But the heat didn't come from the thermostat, it came from anticipation. Everyone knew something big was about to happen. At the front sat the board president Mark, looking like he wished he could melt into his chair, Treasurer Susan clutching her spreadsheets like a life preserver, and of course Karen, clipboard clamped under one arm, lips pursed in a smile so tight it could cut glass. The empty chair to her right, once reserved for Officer Harlow, spoke louder than any rumor. His absence was an omen, and Karen knew it. The parliamentarian I'd hired, a calm woman named Miss Lowell, tapped the gavel. "This special members' meeting is now in order." Her voice carried authority, and for once, Karen wasn't the loudest in the room. Karen tried to start with a clarification, but Miss Lowell raised a hand. "Mr. David has the floor first as petitioner." And just like that, the stage was mine. I stood binder in hand, heart hammering against my ribs. I scanned the room until I found Jay in the second row, sitting tall despite the bruise on his pride. That gave me strength. "Neighbors," I began, voice steady, "we're here because the truth has been twisted. What happened at the pool wasn't a case of vandalism or noncompliance. It was an abuse of power. Tonight I'll show you exactly what I mean." I gestured to the first poster board. A still shot of Jay pressed against the fence, Harlow's hand clamped on his arm. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen shifted in her seat, tugging her blazer as if fabric could shield her from evidence. Next, I played the ring audio. Karen's voice filled the clubhouse, "Make him comply." Every syllable echoed off the walls like a gavel of its own. Heads turned toward her, eyes narrowing. Her smile faltered. Then came the audio enhancement of Harlow's muttered slur. I didn't need to repeat it. The crowd heard it clear as day. A low, horrified murmur spread. Someone in the back whispered, "Unbelievable." I didn't stop there. I flipped to the WITSEC invoices. "This," I said, tapping the circled LLC name, "is the company Karen's son registered. And these checks I held up enlarged copies are reimbursements she authorized. Payments made with our HOA dues. No board vote. No transparency. Just funneling money into her own household." Treasurer Susan blanched, staring at the paperwork like it might bite her. Mark cleared his throat, but words failed him. "And here," I continued, pulling out the bylaw printout, "is the section requiring full board approval for any contract over $500. You'll see no such vote recorded in any minutes. Which means these payments unauthorized, improper, fraudulent." The room erupted in whispers, some angry, some incredulous. Karen slammed her clipboard down, finally snapping. "This is a smear campaign. He's twisting facts, taking things out of context. I was protecting this community." But before she could ramble further, a man in the back stood. It was the councilwoman's aide. For the record, he announced Internal Affairs has confirmed that Officer Harlow is on administrative leave pending investigation. They've received extensive documentation of this incident, much of it provided by Mr. David. The clubhouse went silent. Karen's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, as if even she couldn't conjure a lie big enough to cover this. I delivered the final blow, the letter from Internal Affairs itself enlarged for all to see. This isn't just my word. It's the city's own oversight division. The truth is on paper, and no amount of spin can erase it. Neighbors began to clap hesitantly at first, then louder. A wave of relief, anger, and vindication swept through the room. For once, Karen's voice was drowned out not by her gavel but by the sound of people refusing to be fooled anymore. Miss Lowell banged the gavel. "We will now entertain motions." Hands shot up. Motion to suspend the security program. Motion to freeze all reimbursements pending audit. Motion for a recall vote on Karen's position. Each was seconded, each passed in a chorus of raised hands. Karen's eyes darted around, desperate for allies. But even Susan lowered her head and voted with the crowd. When the last motion carried, Karen tried to gather her papers. They slipped from her hands, scattering across the floor like fallen leaves. Jay watched from the second row, his shoulders finally relaxed. I looked directly at Karen as she scrambled. "Rules are supposed to protect us," I said calmly. "Not be used as weapons against kids. You forgot that." We didn't. The meeting adjourned with more clapping, some cheers, and more than a few sighs of relief. Karen exited quickly, muttering about lawyers and defamation, but no one followed her out. For the first time in years, her clipboard had lost its grip, and as neighbors filed past me, shaking my hand, thanking me, one thing became clear: the tide had turned. Karen wasn't the queen anymore. She was just another resident who had been caught. The clubhouse emptied slowly that night, the echoes of applause still bouncing off the walls. Neighbors clapped me on the back, whispered thanks, and hurried to their cars with a sense of cautious optimism, as though stepping into a new neighborhood that had just been born. Jay walked beside me head high for the first time in months. His bruise was fading, but the confidence in his stride told me something deeper had healed. But for me, the story wasn't over. The evidence had been aired, the board had voted, and Karen's little empire was crumbling, but I wanted something more than her humiliation. I wanted resolution. 2 weeks later, I got it. A letter arrived in my mailbox stamped with the seal of the city attorney's office. Inside was a formal notice. The city had reached a settlement with my family regarding Harlow's conduct. Confidential, of course, numbers blacked out, terms buried in legalese. But one paragraph stood out. Officer Brent Harlow is under review for decertification. Pending outcome, he will not return to active duty. I read it twice, then set it down. It wasn't money that mattered. It was that single word, decertification. The end of his power trip. The end of his smirk behind a badge. I called Jay into the kitchen. He skimmed the letter, then looked at me wide-eyed. "So, he's gone." I nodded. "Looks that way." He let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. And in that breath I heard relief, justice, maybe even hope. But I wasn't finished. At the next HOA gathering held under interim leadership after Karen's recall petition passed, I stood once more at the front. This time, there were no poster boards, no binders, just me holding a single sheet of paper. "I've received a settlement from the city," I began. The room shifted. People expected me to announce I was cashing out, maybe even leaving the neighborhood behind. But I wasn't there to gloat. "I'm not keeping it," I continued. "Instead, I've pledged the entire amount to a new community fund. It will cover after-school scholarships, monthly legal aid clinics in this very clubhouse, and workshops on conflict resolution for kids and adults. The program will be run by a nonprofit independent of the HOA, so no one can twist it for personal gain." The room erupted, not in whispers this time, but in applause. Genuine, unrestrained. Even the neighbors who had once avoided eye contact clapped with conviction. I wasn't finished. "And one more thing," I said, pulling a folded mock-up from my pocket. It was a design for new signage at the pool gate. Big, bold letters: "Every kid belongs." Underneath, access for residents and their families. No discrimination, no exceptions. Gasps, then cheers. Parents smiled, kids beamed. The words weren't just policy, they were a promise. In the back of the room, Karen stood. She looked smaller now, stripped of her clipboard, her title, her loyal enforcer. Her lips moved as though forming an objection, but no sound came. For once, Karen had nothing to say. I ended with the line I'd rehearsed in my head: "Rules should serve people. People shouldn't serve rules." And with that, the neighborhood applauded, not for me, but for Jay, for every kid who deserved to feel safe in their own community, and for the idea that justice could bloom even in the cracks of a broken HOA. That night, walking home with Jay under the glow of street lamps, I realized something. Revenge might feel sweet, but rebuilding something better that was unforgettable. If this story has taught me anything, it's that silence is the fertilizer of injustice. When people look the other way out of fear, convenience, or apathy, bullies like Karen and Harlow thrive. They grow roots, spread their poison, and convince everyone they're untouchable. But the truth is, no one is untouchable when receipts are collected, when courage is mustered, and when community finally wakes up. I fought for my son because he deserved more than whispers and bruises. He deserved to see that his father wouldn't bow to lies or let fear dictate the truth. And in that fight, I realized something bigger. We don't just owe justice to our families, we owe it to our neighbors, even the quiet ones, too scared to raise their heads. So here's the lesson I want to leave you with. Stand up even when your voice shakes. Collect the evidence, shine the light, and refuse to let the smug grins of petty tyrants convince you they've won. Because when the truth finally breaks through, it doesn't just protect one person, it transforms entire communities. Now, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment. What would you have done if it were your child at that pool gate? And don't forget, subscribe for more HOA stories because trust me, there are plenty more battles behind those white fences.